Hi, I'm John Cutterback.
And I'm Sofia Cutterback.
If you're wondering whether you can really be friends with your spouse
and raise children into responsible adults with whom you have a relationship,
and do what it takes to make a homestead, reconnecting with your body and the land wherever you live.
If you just want to think more about how to make a truly happy home in our trying times,
then the Intentional Household, a LifeCraft podcast, is for you. Join us. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you with us. I'm so happy to be with my wife, Sofia, and very excited about our topic here today, when and how to talk to children about chastity and dating. Certainly something that we've spent a lot of time talking about ourselves and trying to figure out how to do, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. I'm glad that we're able to talk about this. I hope that our conversation may be helpful to other parents who are facing the same question.
Well, I hope so too. And we certainly are still learning, and we still have one child who's fully in the home with one in college still. So there's some of this going on, and maybe we'll be able to help out our children now with their grandchildren, with their children. But in any case, this is certainly, in our experience, one of the main ways we relate to children. Mm-hmm. And so I, from the start, want to see it as an opportunity to say, hey, we might not get it perfectly right, but to the extent that we put effort and prayer and discernment into this, first of all, as usual, it's going to be a great opportunity for spouses to grow their relationship. That's something we often don't think of. In these things that are just intrinsically so hard, that is part of the gift, that it's going to draw us together, and it will always bear fruit. It's going to deepen our relationship with our children, even if we didn't do it exactly right. But I also begin with the conviction we need to be doing more of this. By and large, I see it all the time talking to young people, young adults with my own eyes. They are not having these conversations with their parents. Mm-hmm. And this needs to change.
Yeah. And I think that's probably age old. It's a hard conversation to have, and certain parents just not knowing what to do just have avoided the topic. I think that's probably been going on for hundreds of years. It's a hard topic to broach. And somehow you find yourself in the middle of it. All of a sudden you've got little kids and they're just running around, playing with the sand in the sandbox. And all of a sudden now you've got to cover this kind of heavy topic, and you're not quite prepared how to do it. Right, but before we start, I just wanted to, it seems to me like this whole question, it's so important. It's such a, so present for every single person, not just parents vis-a-vis children, but for ourselves. We were children growing through this point. And then of course, chastity is an ongoing question for us. And I just think sometimes the topic, in the modern world, in the effort for people to maybe feel more comfortable with a difficult topic, we've done things that we've titled this conversation as sex education. And there's just something about that phrase that's so clinical. And, I can totally see someone was trying to make it be a little bit easier by just making it clinical. Let's just get down to the facts. No one can be embarrassed about the facts. Let's just talk about the facts. But it seems to me that word sex education has kind of reduced this whole topic to maybe just the biological facts. Yeah, right. And certainly. So I just want to draw you out before we start, just the word chastity, because obviously the whole question of dating, when to date, how to date, is very much dependent and kind of circles around the notion of chastity, which as opposed to just sex education, chastity is a much bigger concept and a richer word, and something that is just a very beautiful, mysterious, rich gift. And so why don't we talk about chastity first? Because it gives us kind of motivation about why it's important to actually try to think about how we're going to address this hard but yet beautiful topic with our children.
Well, it's a great idea, dear, because of course, if that's fundamentally what we are educating them in. Right. And this is virtue education. And I'm very glad you pointed out, let me make explicit now, in my view of talking to children about chastity and dating and marriage and the whole realm of sex, there's actually doesn't need to be much along the lines of the kind of biological, the clinical, the facts, how to, these things I think are way overemphasized. Yeah. And by far the most important thing is the personal approach, the interior dispositions that are necessary, the principles to have in how to think and act in these areas. that's what our children, that's what the young people, that's what we all need.
Mm-hmm.
And the other things to some extent will take care of themselves. I mean, someone could disagree on that, but I mean, far and away, what I'm seeing with my own eyes is not young people like, well, golly, I don't know the facts. I'm just kind of wandering around, not knowing what's going
Mm-hmm.
on. They haven't been formed as regards very important principles. How do I approach this? How do I think about the realm of dating? The when, by the way, of that is a very big, important question.
Yeah, I think so. When it's reduced to simply the facts, then really the concern becomes how to avoid, when to do it, when is it okay, when is it not a sin. Whereas the whole question of chastity is so much bigger than how and when is it okay,
Sure,
right?
sure,
And
sure.
so we're really,
Right.
like you said, we're talking about the formation of the whole person in a way that overflows to many other areas besides just when is it okay, when is it not okay type of question.
Or
And
how to,
so
right.
we want
That's great.
something that is much broader for our children, that actually forms their whole person, which actually changes the way they look at the natural world, changes the way. And
Amen.
so this is
Amen.
what we're talking about, chastity.
And there, we're forming them to be men and women, to be fathers and mothers, and all men are called to be fathers, and all women are called to be mothers. And for all of them, chastity will be a key piece of that. So it isn't just preparing for marriage, though it certainly is that. It is absolutely an instance of preparing them for life, preparing them to be the men and women, the fathers and mothers that they are called to be. So, really quickly, I mean, chastity, in the traditional way that we put it, is the virtue of putting right order into the realm of sexual desires and actions.
Okay, so it's the principle of putting right order into our sexual appetite and actions. Okay,
Yes,
right
yes,
order.
yes.
That's the key there, right?
And it is. And of course, right off the bat, we see how this will include certain no's in there,
Yes.
and it will
Yeah.
include certain yeses in there. But the thing right off the bat to picture is so when trying to picture a virtue, we try to picture what that virtue is in its kind of completed state. And here, we might have the image of a man who is strong and restrained. He's loving, he's even passionate, but in a way that's very beautiful, that's always respectful, that always takes into account other persons, and that recognizes there's a time and a place for things. And it's very much integrated into the other virtues of this man's soul. Switch over to picture that kind of beautiful young mother, middle-aged woman who is very, again, integrated, knows how to appreciate her own sexuality, her own being a woman. That's very much a part of her vocation if she is a mother in the normal kind of biological sense. That her chastity shines through in all of her interactions with her husband, with her children. Why? Because the whole realm of something that's a big part of human life, the passions, the desires that we feel in the realm of sexuality, is really always with us. And how is it affecting us? Is it kind of always pulling us away from the way we should be acting, the things that we should be doing, or is it being more integrated into it? We're never going to get it exactly right.
Yeah. So,
but we can get close.
So you're taking your philosophical definition of what chastity is, and then taking your beautiful examples, putting those two together. It sounds like what you're saying is the sexual desire is something that's given to us as a gift. It's a good thing. And that, unfortunately, man doesn't always order those desires properly due to our fall. But the desires themselves are good, and that they're the way that we can fully participate in them as a gift is if we order them properly. And that's what chastity is.
Good.
So it's not,
Well
chastity is not denying or suppressing or cutting out the sexual desire, but it's actually learning how to order it properly so that it can be fully integrated into our life in a way that helps us become most human and actually includes and overflows other areas of our life. So rather than compartmentalizing, closing, cutting off sexuality, virtue, the virtue of chastity, actually allows it to blossom, overflow, be a real pulsating force in our life that does not overwhelm because it's properly ordered.
Amen. Very well said. And just quickly complement that by saying, and coming to that kind of maturity, that right order, that restraint, that well-ordered love is necessary for absolutely everybody, again, regardless of vocation. And to have this picture, to understand that, will make a key difference. What if one day a daughter says, I'm thinking I want to be a consecrated virgin. We don't have the sense of, oh my goodness, well then somehow, what will become of these good sexual desires that you've been given? We need to have that understanding and confidence that the gift of sexuality is a gift to everybody, in some honor, and you could even say use that gift by giving it up.
Mm-hmm.
But even therein, in their chastity, it wasn't this flat denial and a rejection of it. It was a recognizing its beauty and making a sacrifice of it. I mean, some of the greatest men I know are celibate.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the greatest women I know are virgins, and they are true fathers and mothers. Chastity is key to who they are. You don't feel here's someone who has repressed or denied their sexuality. It's actually part of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very important that we start with that, because ultimately that's actually part of seeing the gift for all of us.
Yes.
Of how sexuality is in a much bigger picture of the astounding human vocation to live in community and grow in virtue and contemplation. There's so much there that is served when we get this right.
So this might be kind of an obvious question, but I just want to circle back a little bit to that definition, ordering the sexual desire. Could you just say ordering to what? Like what does the word ordering mean?
I mean, order always means everything kind of in its place, in its right
place. Is it
place.
In relation to something?
And yes, it is. And most of all here, the most important kind of order, and certainly what's going on here, is an order towards an end, towards the goal, as it were. So in other words, we were given our sexual power for a reason. Ultimately, it's ordered towards coming to fruition in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we need to have a certain richness about that. So thank you for asking. I put it this way. The chaste person, that sexual power is ordered in such a way that it will achieve fruition. The most obvious thing, that's what we'll obviously be talking about most, is in marriage, where then the sexual power, exercised, experienced, and lived chastely, is precisely blossoming into exactly what it could and should have been.
Mm-hmm.
A wonderful way that spouses love one another, and that is fruitful and is a gift to the children, not even just in the conceiving of the children, but even in the right living of it. That sexual power remains a way that, in a sense, children are blessed by their parents who are continuing to exercise it in a chaste way. But it's all in view of the end. The end, more proximately, is procreation and family life, but that in the context of our ultimate human identity. So right order always means in view of the end, and that's what gives it that richness, but it gives content. It means saying no here. It means waiting. It means doing things in this particular kind of way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And so is it possible that you would say, given that the sexual desires ordered toward marriage, that marriage is the thing that creates the nature of marriage, and its requirements are the things that put the restrictions on the sexual desire, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And those restrictions are giving it form so that it can become itself.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? And
great.
That, and
Super.
That, and that hopefully will be being conveyed from the start. Let's begin right there. I mean, the first, aside from the when that we are going to talk about here, of when to have this conversation, when to have that conversation, the place this always begins is in the life of intimacy between a husband and wife. The first way we're forming our children as regards chastity, dating, marriage, sexuality, I'll say this from a man's perspective, is how I honor, love, cherish, and act towards my wife as a whole, and then in a particular way in the realm of intimacy. Our relationship, how we are living it in a particular way, how that is lived out in marital intimacy, is the first formation, because it will be making a difference to them. They will have a sense of, as it were, how things are going there.
Yes, because it's a virtue, and the virtue forms us as individuals, and that's our children's experience of us
It is.
as individuals. And
It
so
is.
when we are chaste in our relationship, then our children experience chastity first before we begin to intellectually form them as to what chastity is.
Amen. But I'm going to get even a little more pinpoint and give an example. A husband who doesn't know how to really respect and cherish his wife in the realm of marital intimacy, the children can feel that on their mother.
Mm.
They just can.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is a wound in that wife and mother's heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very challenging. It's, in a certain level, it's scary. Girls have an incredible ability to feel that, the connaturality they have and the sympathy they have with their mother.
Mm-hmm.
If they have the sense that their mother is not being respected
Mm-hmm.
in the most profound way by their father,
Mm-hmm.
they know that.
Yeah. And then later on, no matter what words you apply to the conversation, they're just not going to have very much effect.
I mean, gosh, imagine.
Or it produces a cognitive disconnect in any case. I'm supposed to say or do this, but my experience of life is this.
And life can be messy. We have to recognize sometimes that might be the case. There might be a case where a woman is talking to her daughters. And if in God's providence that she has to say this, then maybe she has to say it. And this will take discernment and prudence. And she doesn't throw her husband under the bus necessarily, but she might say, and I hope that your husband will be able to be towards you in certain ways you haven't necessarily seen happen.
Mm-hmm.
And again, one would be, again, one would be very careful about when to say that, but that could be something that's said in the truth. Or do you think I'm off on that?
No, I think that's absolutely accurate. And while you're saying it, it just occurs to me, I'm kind of chuckling to myself because it's been a theme in some of the other podcasts that we've done, that all these things that we'd like to do right in parenting, it does really come back down to the parents, doesn't it? Right? To your
meaning as spouses,
as spouses,
yes. Yeah.
And your personal growth and integrity. And so, in a certain sense, whatever it is that we want to do for our children, our relationship to them holds our feet to the fire, right? And so that conversation about chastity sounds like it starts from the very, very, very beginning.
It does.
From the ground up.
And our spouses talking about chastity, I mean, really, this sounds like a little bit of a throwaway. Okay, let's just get past this. And we are going to get past this. And we're about to get very specific about then what to do with children and when. But this to me is it absolutely is the foundation and is the most fundamental aspect of success. Are we really serious in our relationship about growing in chastity, about living according to a natural plan, no matter how hard it is?
Mm-hmm.
Are we consistently making the effort to keep growing in that and humbly be asking for mercy and forgiveness of one another? This is what they're going to have to do. Yeah. It's not just about giving them the do's and the don'ts. It's the whole personal disposition of this is key to who I am. Part of my fundamental calling is to be growing in all the virtues. And right now we're talking about especially this beautiful one that is a key protector and enabler of the beauty of marriage and all relationships. This thing, chastity protects all relationships. A man can relate well to all women when he's chaste, and he will be undermined in his relationship with all women when he is unchaste. Mm-hmm. So we really have a foundation there. But why don't we start to look at then? Okay, now we have these children, and how are we looking at passing on to them a sense for these very things we're trying to form in ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like when I think about it, it's almost like there are two parts. You look at your children and kind of their growth and development in two stages, so to speak, from the perspective of how do we approach the whole notion of chastity. And the beginning stage, when children are quite young, until maybe 7, 8, 9, they're really kind of, boys and girls are kind of the same. Although, of course, boys will always, it's very notable, boys are different from girls. But in the chastity formation question, it's kind of the same type of formation seems to be suitable for both little boys and girls. Would you agree with that?
I do. I mean, given that always there's going to be this aspect of boys will especially noticing things about their father.
Pattern things from their father. Yes.
And likewise for the girls. But I think your point there is it's, well, let's get concrete. It's particularly going to be, I mean, chastity always has a key element in it of restraint. Mm-hmm. It's not only restraint, but there always is this aspect of kind of moderation. That's another, because chastity is a kind of temperance or moderation, one of the
Mm-hmm.
four cardinal virtues, and it's the most important of the kinds of temperance or moderation.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this key element of restraining, and so restraining appetites. The way that's particularly going to show up with the young ones, and I think we want to say here, you don't need to start talking about chastity
Right.
very early on. You
Exactly.
don't have to talk about dating early on. Here again, it's more in fundamentals, and it's going to be in teaching manners, and it's going to be in teaching fundamental things about how our children eat. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's one, especially today. Look, the tradition is very clear on this. One of the main ways, always for all of us, that we practice chastity is by practicing temperance in our eating.
Mm-hmm.
And in this day and age where we're constantly, our children are being assaulted by bad food, bad advertising, and difficult parenting can make it easy to have the sense of, I'll just give the kid a piece of candy. I could try to make parents be unduly scrupulous here, but hey, life is serious and this is tough. We got to recognize that just getting children into a pattern of they're dissatisfied, so give them a sense pleasure. You know where that's heading,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to be aware of that. Teaching them restraint in eating, both by manners at the table. That's a restraint in eating, and restraint. We don't eat anytime, all the time. We don't eat just simply what tastes good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's, I really, that point I think is an extremely important point. It kind of blindsided me. I just never thought of it as being particular connected to preparation for a conversation about chastity. So I want to focus on that. I do want to also get back to manners because I think there's something important there. But do you think that part of the reason that the church's tradition has always been to that bodily restraint of the bodily appetite as regards food is connected to chastity? Because when we the desire for food is a very in the body experience, just
Mm-hmm.
like later on the sexual
Mm-hmm.
desire is a
Mm-hmm.
very in the body
Mm-hmm.
experience. And so it's actually giving children an opportunity to start practicing restraint or awareness in the area of literally a physical
Yeah,
demand on your desire.
that's great.
And so it's very connected, both later when they're older and the hormones have changed and the energy is there, they will experience their body through kind of the medium or the action of a sexual desire.
Yep.
And they've already encountered their body as driving them towards something that they've practiced saying, no, now's not the right time.
Yeah,
Like
that's
we don't
great.
eat
Great way
cake
of putting
before
it.
dinner.
Yeah.
We have it after dinner, or we don't have 10 pieces. We have one.
Yep.
The other thing I just want to say is regards food that for me as a parent was kind of an eye opener as we started doing this more, is that becoming aware that there are certain things in food that's readily available to us that is actually designed there are chemicals in the food that we're eating that's actually designed to make us want more. And
Yeah.
it's just kind of it's a form of it's an economically driven
It's an assault on
reality.
us.
It's an assault. They're putting things in food that actually make us have literally a craving for more.
Yeah.
And so when we're giving our children that kind of food and then saying, oh, you have to master your bodily appetite, we're actually putting the child who's quite young and just learning in a position where they're experiencing a higher than simply moral drive to have more of something that has red dye 40 or whatever the chemicals are in
Yeah.
there that are creating an addiction. And
Mm-hmm.
sugar can be that way too.
Yep.
So when we're not
Sure.
careful about what we give our children, we're actually putting them in a kind of almost impossible situation as regards the practicing a predisposition toward chastity, when we're giving them something that's chemically driving them in a way that's really kind of almost asking them to be heroic on the moral level.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No,
So
it's, again, I know that's like, oh my gosh, what we're going to do, if our children have started to have bad habits of eating certain things,
it just takes a little bit of
breath,
work.
and we're going to do what we can. But it's being intentional about the realm of food. But again, it's always about order. A virtue of temperance, part of the virtue of temperance is putting right order into our desires for food.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's always been seen that those two projects go together, putting order in your desire for food and putting order in desire for sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
sex, go hand in hand. And one way that you can always practice, one time I had a student ask a question that caught me years ago out of kind of clear blue. Well, how do I practice chastity if it's about my sexual desires? and how do I practice kind of doing this right? And the answer to that is the best immediate practice isn't food. And it seems to be almost like a little bit of a gift there. So that's us to be very intentional about this whole realm. Again, always bearing in mind, this is where the principles are so important. We bear in mind the virtue. If it's about temperance, we're trying to lead them towards being able to enjoy food more. Food is such a great analogy for the realm of marital intimacy to this extent, to the extent that you put right order into your desires, which always includes a very key note of restraint, you actually end up enjoying food more. People with good manners and restraint, who know how to have, as it were, dessert at the right time and not at the wrong time, they savor food better. And so our goal is always the fullness of life,
right?
Temperance for the sake of the fullness of life. It's not this negative, be afraid of food, but it is, we got to step up to the plate. One of the main areas we're going to be forming their persons in this cardinal virtue of temperance, which later will have its key manifestation in chastity, but will always have a very important manifestation also in the realm of food. That's where we're beginning.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's very exciting. So I feel like kind of what is beginning to emerge here is that there's a tremendous amount that happens before the quote unquote conversation about chastity happens. That's actually very essential and helpful in forming the child. So the child is unconscious that they're being actually trained or strengthened for the chastity conversation that might be coming. But we as the parents, we know what's coming and we see where they are. And by understanding how these things are connected, in a certain sense, we're always having the conversation with them before we sit down for the quote unquote conversation about chastity.
Absolutely. But that brought to my mind, there might be a place for a little bit of a conversation about food. I think it's kind of fitting. And again, cast it in terms of the virtue, in terms of the goal we're moving towards. Children or son or daughter, we're inviting, no, you can't have that popcorn right now. No, you can't have that candy right now. No, you can't have it. Whatever it is. It is, but every now and then, stop and explain. God has given us a great gift in food. He's given us a great gift in our own hunger for it, and how the fruits of the earth and of the work of human hands can satisfy. And some things are more truly satisfying than others. What truly satisfies and what immediately tastes good are not always the same. There's a great line for them. Just say that line. What truly satisfies and what immediately tastes good are not always the same. See, when we're intentional about this right there, that's already telling them something very important about the realm of sexuality, and they have no idea of it. But then when it comes to it, they're gonna be ready for it. They need to be experiencing this in other areas, in this area particularly, of their desire for food. It's quite beautiful. We start using that language.
And also in the conversation about food, we can say there's an appropriate time for certain kinds of food, right? So it's not that cake is bad just first thing in the morning before we've had anything to eat. It's not appropriate. So we the whole concept of an appropriate time, and then even the notion of there's certain foods that are not appropriate given the dignity of our body. That's good not it's not suited to what our body is designed for, and therefore we can say we're going to not have that food because it disrespects our body. And so again, it's kind of seeing a fittingness of our action in relation to other things, which I think is just it's important in general for the whole moral life, but in particular in the area of chastity.
I completely agree, and I think that we put off a little earlier manners, and then we need to
want to circle to that.
And we got to keep that brief because again, it's a prelude to come into but again, I think these preludes are the absolute setup for success, and we're going to see that right here when at the table. And then all of manners, there are always ways of respecting others and being willing to say no and saying yes at the right time. These are manners. Think of all that's going to apply so much to the realm of chastity, intimacy, etc. And it's going to also add in the element of just respecting other people in general, the non-table table manners, the things of saying please and saying thank you, and addressing people, Mr. and Mrs. and so forth. In certain areas, maybe it's still yes, sir, and no, sir, depending on your cultural situation.
Yeah.
But all of those are, and the boys, and then we treat women differently. That's part of manners. That's just a traditional part of manners that is beginning to have the sense of, for little boys, there's something very precious here about the girls. And we're especially careful of how we address them and what we say to them. And we're not crass. We don't say bad words, especially in their presence. That's part of manners. That's part of getting them ready here too.
And another important aspect of manners is the whole aspect of gratitude, that we actually teach our children gratitude through certain kind of manners that we establish in our home. And that's a very important notion, because when we are grateful, it implies that we see that something was given to us as a gift. And most especially in marriage and in the self-donation, in the marital act, it's imperative that we recognize that what is being given to us, we don't take. It's given to us.
Yes, amen.
And we have a spirit of gratitude, which automatically creates a kind of cloak of something to be cherished and esteemed. And so from the very beginning, that spirit of gratitude, of saying please and thank you, and recognizing that someone has done something of their own volition that we've had to receive. Those are all notions that are exceedingly important and fundamental to a chaste attitude toward one another in marriage.
Totally. You know what that completely reminds me of? We live in an age of entitlement. And I never really made this connection in my mind, but young folks, think how that's connected to the realm of unchastity. When you have the sense of, entitlement, I deserve this, not having a sense of gratitude, gimme. Yeah, I want that. The me generation. Gratitude really does it. Gosh, it's so deeply connected to other things such as reverence, really seeing the other for who he is, generosity. So thank you for that emphasis.
Great. So we have this kind of fundamental instilling of attitudes during the early years of temperance as regards bodily desires, of manners within the home, and particularly gratitude. And then, so how does all of this segue when it finally comes the time for it to become more of an explicit conversation? How to, talk a little bit about what do you think the timing is, and how, and the approach, and things like that.
Good. Well, let's do this. I mean, we have the kind of chastity talk, and we have the dating talk, and let's do. I think we can do a little bit of when and how for both of them.
Perfect. Sounds
all
great.
Right. So let's the chastity talk. Now, and right now, I right off the bat, for me, the chastity, the kind of going explicit on that kind of thing is primarily. I'm going to say for a boy. I'm going to let you say what you think for a girl. I'm gonna just. You can get rid of this. We can get rid of that bee right there. That's a great idea. Thanks.
You go ahead.
So I'm going to keep talking to you while you get rid of that bumblebee here. We got the door open in our little cottage here, and it's a beautiful spring day. So around 10, I'd say, and again, plus or minus all these things. Quick universal principle. Discerning when and how to do this, especially the when, is going to keep us very tuned into our children.
Exactly.
That's part of the gift.
Yeah,
we got to see watching. What is the context that they're in. What are their particular dispositions? What technology are around? What kind of people are they around? What are they experiencing within them right now?
What is their place in the family?
I challenge all parents, particularly if you're blessed with a number of children. Are we really tuned into this? Are we really noticing for each one? We get so busy.
Yeah, it's hard.
But I'm just going to say, for broad strokes, 10 years old, plus or minus, maybe it's you're going to the pool, maybe you're going to the beach, and a father takes his son and says, son, it's always about going positive. Son, I've got something exciting to share with you as now you're growing up. You're growing into a young man already. I want to share with you something that's a very important part of Daddy's life that we haven't had occasion so much to talk about yet. And that's the beautiful aspect of how I guard my eyes. God has given us the great gift of vision with our eyes. And vision with our eyes is always connected to deeper insight that we're made for, a kind of seeing and vision that's not just with our eyes, but it begins with our eyes and how we interact with other people. It's so wonderful to have this gift of being able to see one another. And right now the child's thinking, "Oh my gosh, what's he about to say next?" That was kind of weird. But I'm completely serious though. I mean, if that makes a boy be a little bit wide-eyed, that's
That's a
great.
good
He,
thing.
he he
Yeah.
knows something a little different's going on. Hey, Daddy's engaged. Daddy's tuned in here. Whoa, where's this going? And say, "Son, we'll have occasion to talk about this more later." I use that often. It's a way of showing we're entering into an area that there's going to be more to talk about. But right now, I just want to share with you that it's appropriate, especially for women, for all of us to have a certain modesty as regards our bodies. We can talk a little bit more about what modesty is. But right now, just to kind of finish this one, I'm saying with them, say, we might see sometimes people that don't have so good a sense of that, and they're revealing parts of their body or moving in certain ways that it's not appropriate for us to look upon. And that's where we guard our eyes. And that's where this is something that Daddy is always working on, because I might find myself out of maybe curiosity to be inclined to look. But I say no, out of respect for that person and out of respect for myself, I turn and I look at something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to invite you, son, to work on that with me. And this is going to be a great project. It's a lifelong project that will always be in together.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is perhaps an example of the first kind of explicit, and I think that's very age appropriate. It can be scary to them if we go too far and try to bring in things that they really can't comprehend. But I think everything I just said there is even if it stretches them a little bit, it's within the realm of comprehension to them. It starts to give them a sense of, whoa, there's deeper things going on connected to something as simple as how I dress and where I'm placing my eyes.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful thing, that by saying it that way, you are calling them up to a very particular masculine role of protection. So sometimes the phrase we would use with our son was, "You need to protect the woman's modesty."
Yeah. Yep.
So if for whatever reason she's not properly covered, you do your part by protecting her modesty by looking away.
Yep.
So I think it's beautiful that and I think young boys, while they might not understand the whole broader notion of the physical drive yet, they do already have a strong sense of being called up to protect something.
Yep.
And I think that's very appealing to them.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we kind of do a quick back and forth where now, okay, what do you see yourself saying to our daughter?
Mm-hmm.
It kind of early on, the first kind of conversation. Is it something before they're having their cycle? I know it always stands out in my mind. I almost feel like I heard you have the conversation, but I think you just told me afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so blown away by the beauty of the conversation that you had with one of our daughters. And it depends. And this is where, again, especially the mother is tuned in, really tuned in. And has that conversation just before her cycle kicks in. Or if you miss it, then you have it right then. And that's no fear. Okay, now we're going to jump into this. And that you jumped in with that very positive attitude. That was so life-giving to me and so encouraging to me. And then we can kind of go back and forth here between girls and boys.
Good idea. So as far as the timing goes, in our case, it was definitely, it's hard to know with a girl. Cycles, the approach of the cycle is so varied for different girls. And it was just really a Holy Spirit moment where I began to notice certain kinds of behavior that I said, wow, it's almost like they're PMSing or something. And then I just realized, oh my goodness, it's not like you all of a sudden you go from not having the hormones that produce your cycle to all of a sudden overnight having hormones that produce your cycle. It's a slow and gradual build. And that women are experiencing that, young girls are experiencing that change for a long time. And in an ideal world where everything is working properly, it's a gradual change. But we have a lot of hormonal disruptions due to the environment that we live in. And so sometimes it's not very gradual for girls, and it can be very confusing and painful. Why am I crying about everything all the time? And, their cycle is still a year away. And so it's not like you can point to the cycle directly and say, oh, every month, right before your cycle starts, you start getting weepy. It's all okay. So it's kind of interesting to note that that's a long and gradual, slow change that young girls begin to experience little shadows of what then later on can become kind of more regularly observed cyclical patterns of emotional vulnerability and tenderness. And so, and also I said, when a woman is experiencing sadness or crying or weepiness before her cycle, oh, it's just my cycle, it's okay. That's not really quite accurate, because it's your heart that's coming out. And very often the things you're crying about are things that are really hard for you, but in a better moment, you're able to control them, and you learn all kinds of systems for pushing it down. So it's really it's good to take note at right before your cycle comes. What are the things I'm weeping about? Maybe my body is helping me realize what my heart has been repressing. And we need to acknowledge this as part of who I am, not just being a victim of hormonal physiological changes.
Can I just interrupt you to say, that is so powerful to me. And imagine how that's hard for young ladies or adult ladies. Imagine how, in God's providence, this is a moment where our 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14, so needs, especially right then, the presence of a mother.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
she not feel alone.
Yeah,
that must it be so scary.
Yes,
and this is the chastity formation. It's being with your child. It's not, now's the moment I have to convey certain principles. Here's how she might go wrong. It's like, let me be with you and help you understand and ultimately rejoice in.
Yes.
And that's what was so powerful to me about how you conveyed it to our daughters.
And so part of that conversation is, for me, what I was very anxious about. For so long, I felt kind of a prisoner or a victim as a woman, that we have all these cyclical up and downs every month, and men just seem to march through life without any issues, and it's just such a burden. You feel like so victimized by chemical fluctuations in your body. And I just realized that I didn't want my daughters to feel that way about their feminine body, that their feminine body is actually a gift to them. And rather than seeing it as a punishment or a curse, that it's part of an expression of the wonderful thing that we're created to be, that has a role in a bigger picture, in relation to a spouse, in relation to children, in relation to a household, in relation to a community. And that our body and our physical experience of our body is part of that, not something that we kind of have to deal with as we're trying to do this other great work in the world. It's actually part of the gift. And so when I spoke to our daughters about it, I said to them, from the first moment that God created you in my womb, He made you to be a woman. And what that means is that you're able to be a mother. When you were a tiny baby in my womb, you weren't going to be a mother and have a baby in your womb. Of course not. But He created you so that someday you would be able to. And when you're very little, you couldn't take care of a baby. And even when you're 9 or 10, you can't take care of a baby. And so God has made it that your body isn't prepared to do what it needs to do in order to have that child. But you're slowly beginning to gain the hormones that are preparing your body so that when everything is the right time, you will be able to give life. And so from the very beginning of time, God chose for you for that. And so when you were in mommy's womb, before any of these things were actual, God already designed for that to be part of your body, and that would slowly come to fruition. Then I explained to them that there are hormones that are necessary that prepare a place in what's called the womb, which is the little house where the baby is conceived and nurtured and grow. It becomes the little home for the baby. And that in order for a baby to be able to grow there, God gave our body hormones that prepare a lining inside of the womb. That's like a soft and gentle, fertile place where that baby can take hold and begin to nourish and grow. But if a baby isn't conceived there, then at the end of the month, body says, oh, well, there's no baby here. We don't need this. And so we let go of that lining so that a new one can start in case a new baby should come at that particular time of the month. And so I wanted the children, my daughters, to have this experience of their monthly cycle as part of a beautiful, fruitful, tender preparation for new life, rather than just the experience of expelling, through a bloody discharge, something that is uncomfortable and makes you're emotional and cry, and sometimes it hurts. I didn't want that to be their primary experience. I wanted it to be experience of their identity as a woman, and that this cycle is for a purpose, and that purpose is something that is beautiful and fruitful and nurturing and welcoming and warm.
I just think that's just jaw dropping, and what an astounding gift to be able to share with a daughter, and the contrast with kind of well, it's, oh, sorry, that's starting to happen for you. Yeah, that really stinks. That's just something women have to suffer, and there's it's understandable why someone might do it. Again, parenting always calls us up. It calls us to look again. What has our attitude become towards our own cycle? In the case of the mother, and how are we going to think about that? And there can be situations where it's always opportunities for touching base on even deeper things. Well, why does it have to be hard for me? Why did God make it so it has to be hard for me? We don't have to run that. It's just that can be a beautiful discussion, a hard one, and something where Mama even says, "Well, I don't have a perfect answer for you. That sometimes we just have to suffer and we have to trust. Whatever exactly it is. Most importantly, we can be together with them. We can be in it. They're being heard. They're not alone, and they're being formed, and they absolutely will feel drawn up to kind of, and everyone naturally wants to mature. Even it's a little scary. They want to mature. The woman that how inspiring that would be, and it's in a corresponding way. Especially when it's put this way, and this is the true light. This is not rose-colored glasses. This is the truth.
Yeah,
that is God's plan. And the same thing. Shall I say?
Well, I just want to before we go on to switch back to talking about little boys, which is going to be very similar in some regards. The thing that I was particularly grateful about the inspiration to approach it that way is that it was, people talk a lot about the rite of passage, becoming a woman, that moment, the rite of passage. This gentle conversation, in a certain sense, before my daughters were women, was in a way an invitation for them, like opening my arms and saying, "You're going to be one of us."
Yes.
And so it illustrates that we're a community of women who understand from the inside what it means for you to be a woman, and we welcome you into that. And I think that's very important because the pursuit of virtue by yourself is impossible.
It is.
And we're talking about chastity is a virtue that we're pursuing. And so when you welcome your daughters into a common lived experience that you yourself have, so that your body is kind of the basis of the common ground here, then to discuss a virtue that we're both going to be pursuing commonly, especially as regards our body, is something that's much easier for it to be something that we join in together versus having that conversation when you're concerned that your 16-year-old is doing something that could have very bad consequences. All of a sudden it becomes you coming in, lowering the boom versus we're part of this together. And it's so much more than just chastity, because it's the whole setup for the household and marriage and children, which is a very difficult thing to do. And you feel like you've been invited to do it together with your mother and millions of other women who are called to that too.
And look also how that is, though, going to be a very straightforward, natural segue from that kind of conversation to maybe a year later, maybe a couple of years later, maybe in the same conversation. That depends. Of talking about chastity in the more explicit sense, where you just, it seems it could be something like, and there will be some that will not appreciate the sacredness of what we're talking about right now. And then raising in there, I don't want to say it for you, but the challenge of there will be young men who will be attracted, again, I mean, that's just, there's to put that in a context that's serious, but not throwing men under the bus, but recognizing fallen human nature. There's going to be particular challenges that come along with this great dignity. Was perfectly set up.
And so as you say that, let me just, the conversation then, I can't remember if it was immediate in that moment, or if it was another conversation, but precisely that there are connected with those hormones is the call of man toward woman to the marital act.
And
that is and women towards men. That is an incredible gift. And that in that union, God designed it so there is an incredible bodily experience, joy that comes with that. But it's so precious and it's so sacred that it has to be protected by a promise. And so that's why we cover our body, because those parts of our body are designed for the delight and joy in the marital union.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, those things, we keep them covered because we're saving them for the cover of that promise, that joy that's given to us. And if we indulge in that pleasure before the promise of marriage, we actually destroy the pleasure. And so it actually became a very easy way to, this was not at all throwing men under the bus. It was saying God designed it that a man would find a woman beautiful and desire her. It's supposed to be that way. It's a gift to us that then the full experiences of it is under the covenant of marriage. We're supposed to have that. God wants you to have that exquisite delight in marital intimacy.
Right.
And that's why we protect it beforehand. So actually it was a very easy conversation without throwing men under the bus at all, but simply saying your hormones, that drive is going to be a challenge for you. And in the same way it's a challenge for you, it will be a challenge for men. And we begin to learn how to be aware of it and how to manage it in a way that protects it for our spouse and for ourselves in marriage.
It really is striking me how really kind of that conversation or cluster of conversations that in a sense is centered on this beautiful transition of coming into puberty, starting to have a cycle. It allows you, if we have an integrated vision, it allows us to integrate that for our children.
Yeah.
And I mean, how we dress. I mean, these things that we can't wait until they've already been formed, as teenagers, as their body is developing, they're experiencing this is going to be attractive to men, right? But that all goes together. And maybe there is, in God's providence, a kind of marathon conversation that opens that. And then it opens the door for ongoing such conversations, or maybe it's just kind of naturally, discreetly divides itself into several. From the boy side,
great.
Look, it's not as though we've got all the goods here of, well, here's exactly how to do it. We're just sharing some things from our experience, and there certainly can be other angles here. For us in a homestead context where we have animals that breed. It really has been an opportunity, and we'll say something about how you don't have to have that context. But I think it's interesting what percent of people were in a context where that was allowed for maybe this to come up, particularly between a father and a son, about some of these things, and that has worked very nicely. And let me say immediately, that could among some lead to a certain crudeness, and the key here is it's always about sameness and difference. We're like animals in certain ways, and then we're very different. And so it would allow us to, well, here's certain things that go on among the animals. But the notion, I want to emphasize the notion of sowing seed. And I have to say, I have absolutely loved a way of preparing boys for the conversation that comes later is gardening together. I cannot recommend it enough. And I just cut right to the chase of I look for the opportunity, and it's very easy. It's very easy to find it where you're sowing seeds in the garden together, and you're passing that, you're doing that together, and you just say something like, and this is a very intentional thing. Say it's such a gift that we're here doing this together. It's such a natural, wonderful thing that God has given us that we can sow seeds in the earth. And early on, I love just saying, sowing seeds is always a very beautiful, beautiful thing, and it's to be done well. I just I just leave it at that. And does something echo down inside them deep? I bet it does. But conceptually, they don't know where that's going. But it's a truth. It's a truth. We respect seeds, and we sow them with care, and we sow them at the right time. I think this can be a very, very fruitful
Mhm.
theme to do with boys, and that can be the lead in then for later on starting to have the conversation that is, it's harder with men to know, the timing of puberty is a little bit
Mhm.
more tricky, and so it goes a little bit differently. And again, we need to be tuned in, and sometimes maybe a boy in that tween age starts to act a little weird, like you're saying, the girl. We need to be very aware of that, and heaven forbid that we just have this. Why is George being so rowdy,
Annoying.
annoying, and just
Yeah.
stop it, boy.
Yeah. Or why can't he seem
Versus,
to get his jobs done? Why is he not keeping his
you know,
room clean? Or why?
and
That's usually a
maybe
good
it's
sign that
that we
things are
kind
beginning
of
to
have to.
happen.
Dad, especially now, needs to step up and just and it is where we have to take the time. We have to go move in kind of slowly, but just start to make ourselves more presence. Is it something, son? I've been noticing. You seem to be having some challenges here. Is there anything that's on your heart? Is there anything that's bothering you? To have that kind of conversation, first of all, you have to have that habit. We have to be establishing that kind of conversation every now and then. Maybe we jump in bed with our son or kneel down next to him, or we go camping together and we're in sleeping bags next to one another. We're going for a walk, whatever it is, just to, how you doing? How you doing, son? Anything on your mind? And, it might not be, that might not get much going, but that, that he feels our presence.
Yeah. The main reason isn't to get something out of him, but simply to have him have the experience that your heart is ready and available
Exactly.
for whatever.
That is
Yes.
the prep, and that you can start earlier.
Hmm.
Just having those kind of pillow talk conversations, daddy
Hmm.
and son, and then it will be very straightforward. At some point, I mean, I have an example where it actually did kind of flow out of seeing certain things happening on the farm, certain things notice, breeding animals, and it took some thought on my part, and okay, how to start to have that. Well, son, actually, there's this very beautiful aspect of God has given all men seeds, and they're seeds that, when well planted, can actually grow into a human person. And so, but right now, son, the first thing that I want to say to you is God gives you seeds primarily as a gift for others. Your seeds are never about you.
Mm.
They're always about others. And again, depending on the time, the situation, you might just leave it at that. You might just leave it at that. But that's kind of a context. You've been given something that's a great gift, that's a great entrustment to you, and you're going to have to be a man of integrity, and we're going to be in this together, and we're going to talk about this more as time goes on. I want you to grow into the kind of man. This is part of the reason we exercise restraint while we do our work, and we're responsible, and we act with manners, and we pray, and I
Hmm.
mean, the whole thing. This is all part of our becoming the kind of man that ultimately, son, I'm going to start telling you more and more about what it is to be a father, and what a gift it is to have the relationship I do with your mother. And I want to be sharing these things more with you. This is the context. And right now, actually, the exact transition into, I mean, I don't think you have to get into a lot of specifics until it comes to more kind of the conversation which we need to get to here about dating.
Hmm.
That's where certain specifics are going to have to be brought up, and that conversation has to happen. But I mean, maybe again we could keep lingering. I'm going to transition by saying, I think part of the challenge of the day and age in which we live is, with the kind of delayed maturing, delayed and extended maybe not delayed ourselves, but adolescence that extends
Yeah.
longer than it naturally should have in a more
Hmm.
healthy culture. We have a particular problem we all need to be aware of. There are biologically, our children are going to want to start dating. And what I mean here by dating is just like relating romantically, start separating out from the herd, as it were, with one another before they are mature enough to do so.
Hmm.
And some have pointed out, well, gosh, at this age, say, if we're talking about the college age particularly, isn't this the age where by nature they should be doing this? This is where my response, in a healthy culture, yes, they should have been able to start to date earlier. But in our culture, which for a host of reasons, they're maturing very late, they're not ready. And the remedy isn't to throw them into dating and say, well, you better grow up quickly so you can do this dating right. At this point, I think that in living in the situation with which we are, I am a firm believer in conveying to our children, it's going to be hard, but I'm going to ask you to wait to date. I'm going to ask you to wait to have that particular relationship with that young lady, that young man that you have a crush on.
Yeah.
And again, we need to be with them. We need to show them we understand what that means. Son, and you maybe share a story. I completely understand that, if you're sweet on somebody, you're really attracted to her, and you naturally find yourself wanting to spend more time right there. And to convey, it's okay that you feel that, but to convey a context on certain principles why you will want to separate out a particular one. You'll want to, and she might also want to be separated out prior to when the right time for doing that is going to come. And this goes to the whole theme of restraint.
Yeah. So it seems to me, it strikes me listening to you say that, given what we've just been talking about, that, in a situation, maybe we're preparing them for chastity by the right environment and the right conversations, and that show the connection between our children's sexuality and the gift of mutual self-donation in marriage, a covenanted relationship, that if you've done it right, you've created in them a desire for marriage.
Yes, right.
And so then they get to this place where their body is firing, is on all cylinders. You've kind of created a moral desire for this beautiful thing called marriage. And then we get to this point where we have to say to them, yes, but not now. Right. And that does seem, so there are other things. So what are those other things that you ideally would want a young person to acquire before you would feel that they're ready? And obviously when you get married, there's tons of growth that happens. So we're not saying you have to be 100% yourself and mature and all that before you get married. But obviously you seem to be implying that there are certain things that are essential, that are required in order to make that initial promise of commitment in marriage.
I am saying that.
Tell a little bit about that.
I'm going to get to some extent concrete here and just say, I have been around very fine young people. I'm a college professor, right? So I've been around very fine 17, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds. And it's always a little dangerous to paint with too broad a stroke. But I am going to say this, right? And you can have people that are very fine people you're very proud of. They're doing well. They've been even well raised, for sure. But particularly just given certain limitations of our culture and the customs and practices of our culture, there's a whole set of ways of maturing that they haven't done, say, when they're 18. 150 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever it is, an 18-year-old from a good, quote, good family would look very different than an 18-year-old from a good family today. And so it's a particular challenge, but we have to face it straight on. And I've seen it from all sides. I've seen it very often. You have very well-meaning, well-intentioned, well-raised 18-year-olds who start dating one another. I'm not saying it's always a train wreck, but by and large, I say to myself, to cut to the chase, I wish they had a parent that had kind of prepared them and just said, the fact that you want to start dating exclusively does not mean it's the right thing. The fact that you feel even a good desire, you're not having, this isn't driven by unchaste desire. This is driven, you want to get married, perhaps. Great. I grant it. The reality is there has to be a certain baseline of maturity. And I've seen it again and again. To some extent, this is just experiential. It's hard to put in universals to make that absolute, here's exactly where the line is. But I'd put it this way. So easy to say this, but it's huge. A sense of responsibility and ownership. The Jocko Willink's book, Extreme Ownership, has had such purchase that Jordan Peterson has had such purchase is because a great disease of our age is this lack of responsibility, taking ownership. And we need to put men especially in a context where they're going to develop that. Another one is same-sex friendships. Because marriage requires a certain ability to relate in a friendship way on a very mature level. And those habits are first developed in same-sex friendships. But by and large, for so many reasons, technology, the lack of natural context for relationship, that in general that our high schoolers are not developing this kind of friendship, or even if they have a friendship with some good people, the fact that there's not the kind of responsibility and maturity and ownership that there should have been at this time means that their relationship, even if not bad, is really quite immature.
Yeah,
So
I'd
we
like
need
to.
that same-sex friendships in more mature contexts is a key preparation before marriage.
Yeah, I'd really like to underscore that, because especially thinking of girls, I'm not as attuned to what's happening, in high school age boys. High school age girls are, really tight bands of, tittering girls who, go to college as best friends, my bestie, I love you more than anything.
And maybe good, very, very good girls.
And they may be good girls, but I just want to kind of draw the connection between, we've talked about this in other podcasts, and certainly, of course, in your book on friendship, that friendship is not just being together or committed to each other in the sense of, you always have my back and that kind of thing, but that it's actually living together in pursuit of virtue and holding each other accountable. So that is something that's possible at a younger age, but in general, it's not what young friendships are pursuing together. It's actually something that has to be the fruit of a more mature person who has now turned their sights toward virtue. And so I think what you're saying is that at the age of 18, it's a really transition moment where they're growing out of those younger friendships, which is having something to do in common, and turning more to what is actually an adult mode of existence, of considering what is the meat of the things that we're looking at and that we're engaging in. And so it's not even saying something pejorative like it's a disease of our time, et cetera. But it's just kind of a fact of human emotional and mental development, is that the friendships that happen during the age period in high school actually are not focused on the thing that actually become the stuff of true friendships. And so the college age is particularly a very important time for same-sex friendships, not because you didn't engage with girls in your high school period, but it's actually the first and new opportunity to do it in a way that actually is formative in the way you would need in preparation for a marriage friendship.
Well said. Well said. So let me be particular, because some of this is so wonderful. Maybe we'd have to come back to this again in another podcast. But right now, what I want to say is, we've talked about all this lead up. But let me be very concrete, particularly about this dating thing. My experience, I think that we should tell our children when they get to high school that we don't date in high school. And by dating, I don't mean going out on. You can never go. You can't go to the prom. No, you can go to the dance. You can go to the prom. You can have someone escort you, but in understanding that we're not going to develop a romantic relationship with this particular person.
That's exclusive,
and everybody knows what it is. It's he's my girlfriend, and this is my girlfriend, this is my boyfriend. Yep. And even if you're not spending a ton of time together, if you're just but he's my one. That's a very specific romantic kind of thing. That to be separating out from the others as we are our one another's here, that's a very serious kind of thing. That is what I'm broadly calling dating right here. And dating in the traditional understanding is always to be approximate preparation for marriage. Proximate means close. These things is not an absolute line. You can't say an absolute length of months or years, but it should be. We shouldn't be dating. This is my romantic other, unless marriage is in the reasonable proximate future. This is why at this point, I think it's really important to prepare our children. No dating in that sense in high school. And part of the reason I'm saying that is because I've been around college students for 30 years. And I say unequivocally and with confidence and without insults to people, the vast majority of freshmen in college are too immature to be exclusively dating. And I'm not saying that's an absolute. There are exceptions. Once we're at college, but I mean, we have to judge. But I still like to say, and I've said for years to my college students, some go with this, some don't. But I'm just sharing my thought that you're not going to fail, or it's a good idea to think in terms of just saying, maybe I'll just set aside my first year to say, wait to date. I'm going to focus on my studies. I'm going to focus on my same-sex friendships. I'm going to focus on my interior life, maybe the first time away from home. And I mean, and not everyone's going to go to college, but a lot of people do. And I think this is an important, kind of example here, and it will be implied in different ways in other situations. Then, sophomore year. Go ahead.
Can I just ask you a provocative question? Because I think that this might actually be helpful for some of our listeners. Why, so we talk about the importance of same-sex friendships and friendship preparing you for marriage. Why couldn't an exclusive dating relationship between a man and a woman be a development along the lines of friendship that helps prepare you for the friendship of marriage?
It's hard to express that conceptually. I wish I could somehow just say, if you've seen what I'd seen with my own eyes for so many years, it just becomes experientially obvious that in the way that I expressed it is the specific demands of a romantic relationship, which are very serious, take a kind of attention and are a kind of distraction from the more fundamental, those kind of romantic elements, the extra challenge of the chastity thing, and the aspect of these kind of high hopes and expectations. We see this all the time of the kind of, well, he's not spending enough time with me. Like, to 18-year-old boys, it's not, there's, you're not going to just have the situation of the exclusivity is a big problem. Well, he was talking to the other boys. I mean, there's so many things, understandably, the guys and girls get very sensitive about in the romantic relationship and are always fighting about or demanding of one another if they're not fighting, is because it is a proximate preparation for marriage. There does need to be that exclusivity. That's why there naturally tends to be a certain jealousy there that again makes very big moral, social, psychological demands upon us that people are not ready for.
Yeah.
They need to be learning, I'll say, the basic skills of friendship, which are exceedingly demanding, and we can't go into the moment at the moment. But it's just, we see this again and again and again. There's so much to be said for the 17-year-old, the 18-year-old working on with same-sex friendships and those other serious things in life. Is it, if you're not going to college, is it working on a job, holding down a job, and really attending to that, while I emphasize it again, in interior life, prayer life. It's going to be harder to develop an interior life after you're married. You have to have some very serious, mature habits, maybe habits that are formed once you've left home. That's another reason for so many who then go off to college. There's so many important things decisions they need to make. Drinking and how am I going to spend my time? With whom am I going to be going out and spending
time? How am I going to socialize?
I mean, to throw the romantic is like throwing a little gas bomb in there. In my experience,
it kind of fries the senses. It's like a nerve gas.
So right now, I just think, when and how to talk to children about chastity and dating. Well, right now, I've really been emphasizing here at the end, from my experience as a college professor, and I think it connects with the other things we've been saying, to be talking to them about dating and how wonderful it will be in the right time, as in so many other things, and then how to date itself. I almost want to say, I think we should hold off, and then maybe fundamentally,
that's a big conversation.
We've already set up fundamentally how we're going to say there's so much loveliness to be built into now that you're in that exclusive relationship. You're going to be bringing to bear all the principles and the virtues and the dispositions that we've been talking about. Son, daughter. This is where you're really going to show who you are. This is where you're going to be really challenged in new ways, and then you would move into the more specific things. But that is prepared for by the others, because it's so much a matter of timing. And have we gotten the kind of character and interior dispositions, especially chastity, right? At least to have been kind of well on the way of it. Now we can talk about what we're going to do in our dating.
Yeah. And I think part of the thing that we're presupposing as we're saying all this, we're talking about having that conversation. The question is, how have you prepared your relationship with your child for any conversation? So to be able to speak these things into their life at the right moment really requires that there has been an ongoing conversation already about all kinds of other things. How are you feeling? How's baseball going? Oh, I'd love to show you this such and such that I love. It's constantly an exercise of, and not because it's an exercise, but because we love our children, of inviting them in. Unless we're doing that, then that moment where you need to have a conversation, they're not going to be able to receive you if they feel like they haven't been received themselves up to that moment. So I think that's really critical to remember.
But hand in hand with that, I just want to say, some might be discouraged. Well, what if I haven't done that? And already losing a teenager, for instance. Wherever we are, we can pray, and we can start again. And we can only do what we can do. And mourning for past mistakes is never fruitful. Discouragement is not fruitful. Where can we begin again now? With some parents, it's going to be just making ourselves available and just convey, I'd love to have certain conversations with you if you're open to that. It's going to be a pain, and we're going to have to offer that up as a cross, as a suffering, a sacrifice, if we're not able to. But we can always begin again if we're not very good at that, or it wasn't done for me. Yeah, perhaps. And from wherever we are, we're going to say, maybe we learn from certain things that weren't given to us. Or we look back and we think, boy, it would have been so nice if someone had asked us this or had shared with this. Let's do that as parents, and encourage our children as parents, if that's where we are in life, to do that too. There's always hope. We can always begin again.
Yeah. And when we come to that conversation that we haven't really had before, and the child's not really open, if we come to that conversation having awakened in ourselves the beauty of the thing that we desire for our child because we love them, they hear that word differently than if it's just coming in to lower the boom of don't do it.
Amen.
And so I think that makes a big difference. And also, as a parent, if you haven't had the opportunity to create that relationship with your child, to come into that first conversation with, I realized that I didn't really talk to you about that. Or I just want to share with you, no one ever talked with me about that. And I'm realizing that I wish they had, and I wish I could have done better for you, but I'm ready to start again.
Amen.
So if we come from that place of seeing the good that we want to offer our children, and we come authentically offering that, it's really remarkable what it does, because our children are just dying for our heart.
They are.
Yeah.
They are. They might not accept it back immediately in their hurt, but it will still bear great fruit.
Yes,
absolutely. Always in its time.
Yeah.
Great having this conversation with you, dear.
Let's come back for the rest of that dating conversation.
Great to be with you all.